Came to the Pope's audience because we wanted to give him a certificate making him an honorary member of our group of Fratres of Sanctastiano blood donor volunteers.
Pope Francis has died.
Imagine a man who held one of the most powerful positions in the world, a man who could have lived in a palace, worn the finest clothes, and had access to almost limitless wealth. Now, imagine that after this man passes away, his family gathers to hear his final will and testament. They are not crying because he left them a fortune. They are crying because he didn't. The world expected Pope Francis, the leader of the Catholic Church, to have accumulated great wealth. But when his sister, Maria Elena, stood up to read his will, her voice trembling, she revealed a truth that shocked everyone. He left no money, no houses, no stocks. Instead, he left them an immeasurable treasure, something so powerful it brought his family to tears. What was this treasure, and why was it more valuable than all the money in the world? This is the story of a man who lived by a simple, powerful idea and the incredible legacy he left behind. Jorge Maria Bergoglio, the man who would become Pope Francis, was not born into power or privilege. He came from a very ordinary working-class neighborhood called Flores in Buenos Aires, Argentina. His family were Italian immigrants, and they lived a simple life. They were not rich, but they were not desperately poor either. They were careful with their money, and everything in their home had to be saved and looked after. His father was an accountant for the railway, and his mother was a quiet but disciplined housewife. As the oldest of 5 children, Jorge learned from a very young age what it meant to be responsible for others. His childhood was like that of millions of other children, except for one special quality. He always listened carefully when someone was sad, even if that person was a complete stranger. As a teenager, Jorge loved football and music. He was a huge fan of the San Lorenzo team and loved playing football with his friends in the streets. He studied hard, but he never imagined he would one day become a priest. After he finished high school, he went to university to study chemical engineering and then got a job working in a laboratory. To earn extra money, he did all kinds of jobs. He worked as a bouncer at a local nightclub and even as a cleaner for a family. His life as a young man was not focused on the church. It was about being independent, learning about the world, and making a living, just like any other young person. The big turning point in his life came in 1958, when Jorge was 21 years old. After a powerful spiritual experience during confession in a small church, he said he felt touched to the very core of his soul. No one forced him into a religious life. In fact, his mother was strongly against it. But Jorge had made up his mind. He decided to join the Jesuits, a decision that meant saying goodbye to any other kind of career or family life. He was ordained as a priest in 1969. Then, in 1973, during a time of great political trouble in Argentina, he became the leader of the Jesuits in the country. This was a brutal and scary period, when the military government was kidnapping and torturing people who spoke out against them, including priests and intellectuals. Jorge himself was suspected by the authorities and criticized by others. It was during this difficult time that he learned important lessons about staying silent when necessary, being patient, and the high price you sometimes have to pay for standing up for what is right.
In 1998, he became the Archbishop of Buenos Aires, but he did not act like a typical powerful religious leader. He refused to move into the big, fancy palace that came with the job. Instead, he chose to live in a small apartment in an ordinary neighborhood. He cooked his own meals, washed his own clothes, and rode the bus to get around. The local police even nicknamed him the bishop everyone has seen on the subway. When he was made a cardinal in 2001, a very high honor in the church, he did not change his simple lifestyle. He only brought a small suitcase with him to the Vatican for the ceremony. In 2005, he was considered as a possible candidate to become pope, but he withdrew his name. Then, in 2013, after Pope Benedict XVI resigned, Jorge Mario Bergoglio was chosen as the new pope. He took the name Francis, after Saint Francis of Assisi, the saint who gave up all his wealth to serve the poor. He was the first pope ever from the Southern Hemisphere, from Latin America, and from the Jesuit order. The choice of his name was his first clear message to the world, a message that needed no explanation. From that day on, the world saw a different kind of pope. There was no fancy penthouse in the Vatican. He lived in a much simpler guest house called Casa Santa Marta. He did not wear elaborate glittering robes or expensive red leather shoes. He drove a simple Fiat 500 car. Many people did not believe this simplicity was real. They thought it was just an act for the public. But the people who had lived next to him in Buenos Aires for years said that this was just how he had always lived. Pope Francis did not choose a simple life to impress people. It was simply who he was. His journey from a simple neighborhood in Argentina to the Vatican was not a story of seeking glory. It was a series of choices that went against what society expects. One by one, Jorge Mario Bergoglio gave up money, status, comfort, fame, and even the right to stay silent in the face of injustice. Every step had its cost, and of all the things he let go of, the only thing he held on to was the reason he had entered the church at 21 years old, a simple belief that living for others is the only thing that truly matters. In his first year as Pope, he was very outspoken in his criticism of priests and church leaders who lived luxurious and lavish lives. He said they were lost in their search for comfort and had forgotten their spiritual duty. For Pope Francis, it was unthinkable to ride in a luxury car through city streets where poor people were begging for food. His words were not empty talk. He backed them up with strong action. He ordered a complete review of all the Vatican's financial institutions to make sure everything was honest. He introduced new strict rules to prevent money laundering. He demanded that the Vatican's finances be made public, something that had never been done before. But more important than these actions was the way Pope Francis looked at the world's problems from a moral point of view. He did not see his role as Pope as separate from his responsibility to all people and the planet.
In 2015, he published a major letter called Laudato Si. This document called for all of humanity to rethink its relationship with nature. It was not just for Catholics, it was for everyone. Pope Francis described the earth as our common home and warned that destroying the environment was not just a scientific problem, but a deep moral failure. He said that when people choose profit over responsibility, it is always the poorest people who suffer first. Later, he produced another important document called Fratelli Tutti, which called for brotherhood and friendship between all people, no matter their religion, race, or political beliefs. He argued that conflict does not come from our differences, but from a lack of trust and a refusal to talk to one another. This document was welcomed by Muslim and Orthodox Christian leaders and was a big step toward healing divisions that were centuries old. In 2024, he published Dolentissimo Matrice, where he became the first pope to seriously question the rise of technology and artificial intelligence. He was not only worried about machines taking jobs from humans, but also about people losing their moral compass in a world run by computer algorithms. He called it a crisis of moral silence. If a future pope were to read these documents, he would see that they were Pope Francis's true will, not a legal document locked in a safe, but a set of values that he built publicly, step by step, over more than 10 years of leading the church. "I don't own a bank account," Pope Francis once told a group of journalists in a private meeting. "I don't own a house, but I know what I'm leaving behind." He did not say this proudly, but with the tone of a man who understood the consequences of every choice he had made. When a pope refuses to own anything, refuses to give property to his family, and refuses to let the church become a place for secret, dirty money, what he leaves behind is a moral challenge for the people who come after him. Pope Francis himself did not call these things treasures, but when his sister Maria Elena and his other relatives heard his will, they understood. They realized that his principles were the only legacy he was leaving them. It was something you could not touch or count, but it was so powerful it made them cry at his funeral. Because this man, their brother, had lived exactly as he preached, and he died without anyone being able to say he had betrayed what he believed in. What is left for his family? Pope Francis had 4 brothers and sisters, but by the end of his life, the only relative he regularly spoke with was his younger sister, Maria Elena Bergoglio. She lived in Argentina with her 2 children. This small family stayed out of the spotlight during all his years as pope. There is no proof that they ever used their famous connection for personal gain. There is no sign that they received any financial help from the Vatican. For Pope Francis, this was something he worked hard to maintain.
For years, he called his sister twice a month. Their conversations were not about religion or Vatican politics. They talked about simple things like food, the weather, or he would just ask her, "Are you still able to go for walks?" Pope Francis once told his bodyguards not to write down or keep any records of his phone calls home. He believed that if every conversation with his family became an official historical document, then they would no longer truly be a family.
Maria Elena had not followed a religious path in her life. She worked as an administrator at a school, living a normal life in the suburbs of Buenos Aires. When her brother Jorge became pope, she was the only one in the family brave enough to ask him a direct question. "Am I still your sister, or am I now just part of the Vatican?" He replied, "As long as you keep my phone number, I am still Jorge." In his memoirs, published in 2025, he wrote a short passage about Maria Elena. "My sister did not ask me to know more, but to make sure I had not forgotten who I was." This was a rare moment where he mentioned his family in an official book, because most of Pope Francis's life is a public story without a family background. At his funeral, Maria Elena did not appear on camera. She stood quietly in the family section. The will she read that day was not a list of assets. It was a handwritten document that contained 3 things Pope Francis asked his family to promise. First, never to accept donations, gifts, or fake jobs from any organization that was using his name. Second, never to publish his personal letters, memoirs, or photos if the goal was to make money. Third, to continue living their lives just as they always had, without using their famous connection to get any special treatment. To many people, these might sound like 3 harsh rules, but for Maria Elena, they were her brother's way of staying true until the very end to the value he believed in most, never turning respect into a tool for profit. After the funeral, she told the press very briefly, "He left us nothing to divide, but he left us something to keep with honor." Pope Francis's 2 nephews, Maria Elena's sons, have also never appeared at any Vatican event. They refuse to give interviews, stay out of the media, and do not use the Bergoglio name to get any special opportunities. According to their friends, they were taught from a young age that Uncle Jorge is not a famous person. He just does special work in a special environment. This attitude did not come from a place of shame. It came from a principle that the whole family agreed on: to let Pope Francis live out his role as Pope without being held back by any family demands. This is very different from what we often see with powerful families, in politics, or even in religion, where relatives become extensions of that power. In Pope Francis's case, his family were like a protective wall, not an extension of his influence. The value he left them was a set of principles. It was the strength to say no to taking advantage. It was the wisdom to keep a healthy distance from the glow of fame. And because he left them nothing but these principles, they cried. They did not cry because they lost out on money or because they were disappointed. They cried because they understood that being his family did not give them privileges, but gave them a much heavier task: to keep clean the memory of a man who lived exactly as he said he would.
Living with such high principles came with a great price. One of the first big blows to his reputation happened with the Chilean sexual abuse scandal. In 2018, Pope Francis initially defended a bishop who was accused of covering up abuse, saying he had not seen clear evidence. This statement caused immediate anger. Many victims came forward, and Catholic groups demanded transparency. Pope Francis later admitted he had been wrong. He sent an independent team to investigate and accepted the resignations of all the Chilean bishops. But the damage to the trust people had in him was not easily repaired. In the eyes of many, it was a moment when he seemed to have lost the integrity he fought so hard to maintain. His decisions on social issues were also very controversial. When he allowed priests to bless same-sex couples in 2023, he was criticized from both sides. Conservatives said he was going against the church's teachings. Progressives said he did not go far enough because he still would not allow same-sex marriage. Pope Francis did not change the document or hold a big press conference to explain himself. He simply said, "No one should be denied love." Inside the Vatican, his financial reforms touched on very sensitive areas. He stopped suspicious investments, shut down foundations that were linked to powerful oligarchs, and, very importantly, he ended the financial immunity that several high-ranking cardinals had enjoyed. These actions made him many enemies within the Vatican walls. At one point, a group of cardinals secretly tried to pressure him to resign, saying his health was too poor. Pope Francis continued his work, but he saw many of his closest allies resign or be replaced. On social media, especially on extremist channels, conspiracy theories spread that Pope Francis was secretly hiding money, that he was a two-faced man who acted poor to hide his real power. One website even called him a snake in a white hat. There was no proof for these accusations, but they spread widely, especially in conservative circles that disliked his approach. Tensions also came from international politics. In 2016, he directly criticized the plan to build a wall on the border between the United States and Mexico, calling it unchristian. This put him in direct conflict with the US president at the time, Donald Trump, and he became a target for attacks from right-wing media, but he never took back his statement. Instead, he insisted that faith should be used to build bridges, not walls. The price he paid was not just disapproval. It was the deep loneliness of being questioned by the very institution he led. Pope Francis once told a priest he trusted, "No one is so opposed as the one who tries to keep things right." That remark was never made public, but it was later found in the priest's private diary. From the outside, Pope Francis looked like a globally loved leader. But inside the Vatican, his reforms had made many powerful people unhappy. Pope Francis knew this, and he accepted it. He understood that if he played it safe and avoided all conflict, the only legacy he would leave behind would be one of compromise, not principle.
On the evening of his funeral, St. Peter's Square was completely full, but it was silent. People stood for hours without any program, without any organizers. The only light came from tens of thousands of candles held in people's hands, their glow reflecting on the ancient stone walls. Some people carried pictures of Pope Francis. Others held pieces of paper with lines he had written. The phrase repeated most often that night was, "You live as you believe." All around the world, from Europe to South America, from Africa to small communities in Asia, people were holding memorial services. But what was remarkable was that many of these gatherings were not organized by churches. They happened because of the people themselves. A group of janitors in Rio de Janeiro set up a small altar on the sidewalk, lit candles and read passages from Laudato Si. A group of students in Nairobi sat together on their campus and read an English version of Fratelli Tutti. These images did not need any guidance from the church. They happened on their own, quietly and sincerely. Not everyone had agreed with every decision Pope Francis made, but many people believed in the core of his legacy: kindness without a big announcement, and compassion without needing a reason. In a world that is increasingly divided by politics, ideology, and technology, Pope Francis's legacy is not found in any set of rules. It is found in the choice to live slowly, to live clearly, and to live for others. He himself said, "I have no ambition to leave behind anything great. I only want to be remembered if I am heard." Those words were on the last page of the document that Maria Elena read at the funeral. There was no big speech, no preaching, just a gentle conclusion from a man who never put himself at the center of attention. Years after his death, scholars will surely summarize his time as Pope with numbers. How many documents he issued, how many financial reforms he made, how many church affairs he handled. But for most people who met him even once, what they remember is not his policies. It is the way he shook their hand, the way he bowed to them, the way he never let his formal position create a distance between him and the person in front of him. "The first day he arrived, I was about to bow to him," recalled a staff member at the guest house where he lived. He said, "Just call me Jorge, we both work here." This small detail is not written in any history book, but it is details like this that make the memory of Pope Francis live on longer than any sermon ever could. The legacy he left behind cannot be divided up, cannot be measured, and cannot be handed over. It is not in a bank. It is not in a legal will. It has no price tag. But it is visible in the way people change after encountering his story. It is visible in the way his family upholds the principles he lived by. It is visible in the way a poor person feels valued when he showed up without any ceremony or fuss. Maria Elena did not speak publicly again after the funeral. She returned to her daily life in Buenos Aires. When a foreign journalist asked her for an interview, she said only, "We are not mourning a pope. We are mourning a brother." And the hardest thing, she suggested, was not accepting that he was gone, but holding on to what he believed in a world that is changing so fast. There was no music in the final moments of the service, no familiar hymns, only a recording was played. It was Pope Francis's own voice, soft and clear. "If I leave you anything, it is the conviction that goodness has a place in this world, whether in the Vatican or on the streets." Perhaps what people will remember most about Pope Francis is not what he held on to while he was alive, but what he was willing to give up to keep his soul intact. The story of the treasure that made his family cry is not about money. It is about how a person can live their life so truthfully that when they are gone, their loved ones do not feel like they have lost something, but feel like they need to continue the work. If you also found something in this story that made you think, please let us know in the comments below. We would love to hear what you feel about his life and legacy. And if this video reminded you of the power of living a principled life, please show your support by giving it a like, sharing it with someone who needs to hear this story, and subscribing to our channel so you don't miss our next videos about people who change the world. Thank you for watching until the end.